Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Khalek, and this is Dispatches. The film industry often sidelines stories from Palestine. If they get told at all, they're flattened, sanitized, or stripped of the daily grinding violence of life under occupation. But filmmaker Farah Nabulsi is one of the bold voices breaking through that silence. Her powerful feature film, The Teacher, set to release in New York on April 11th and nationwide on April 18th, with distribution by Watermelon Pictures, is a gripping emotional and political drama about life in the occupied West Bank. It follows a Palestinian schoolteacher grappling with a traumatic past while trying to protect a promising student from falling prey to Israeli settler violence, and facing a gut-wrenching dilemma when an Israeli soldier is taken prisoner by the Palestinian resistance. Inspired by true events, The Teacher offers a rare and intimate look into the human cost of colonialism, from land theft and demolitions to the impossible choices people must make to survive. And it does so without reducing Palestinians to symbols or quiet victims. This film is raw, grounded, and in many ways, revolutionary. I'm honored to be joined by Farah Nabulsi, the Oscar-nominated director and screenwriter behind this film, to talk about why she made it, how she brought it to life under military occupation, and what it means to bring a story like this to the global screen. Farah, welcome to Dispatches.
Good to be here.
I'm so happy to have you on. I'm so excited for this movie to be released in cities across the US, The Teacher. It was such an incredible film, and I want to get to that. But, first I wanted to kind of start with you. For those who may not know your work, I guess just can you explain who is Farah Nabulsi and what led you to filmmaking?
Oh, wow. Okay. Who is Farah Nabulsi? I'm still trying to figure that out, actually. In my 40s. Yeah, so I'm somebody who was born, raised, educated in London, in the UK. But I am Palestinian by blood, by heritage on both my parents' side. And I had been to Palestine a number of times as a child. And then around 10 years ago, I went back for the first time in more than 25 years. So we stopped going around the first Intifada. And I went back and I saw with my own eyes what I thought I already knew and understood, to be honest, but clearly hadn't, and certainly not to the extent of how colossal the injustice on the ground in Palestine is, that reality. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. So I had previously been, my background is in the world of business and finance. I was an investment banker. I ran a for-profit business. And I just was blown away. So without sounding too cheesy, going home literally changed me and the trajectory of my life. So I started to go back and forth, and I would write therapeutically about what I had seen and felt, and began to sort of imagine, as I exercised empathy, basically. And then it took me a couple of years to sort of say, right, I want to express myself creatively. I want to tell these human stories about this very marginalized community who have been silenced, who have been oppressed, and I just jumped in the deep end and sort of adapted my initial writings as short films. And then, the rest is history. The film thing, sorry, you were saying a bit about Farah. So I made these short films, and then I'm in the industry now. I've realized that really people do want to engage. They want to know more. The films are resonating with them. And so then I was writing and producing, and then I also directed a short film called The Present. The Present just blew up. It had the most incredible reaction internationally. We won over 60 international awards. We won a BAFTA. We were nominated for an Oscar. It was on Netflix worldwide, Canal Plus, you name it. And then here I am with The Teacher, which is my debut feature-length film, a full 2 hours, that premiered at Toronto International Film Festival, September 2023. So I don't know if that was a good summary of Farah. Clearly.
No. It's. I think it's super interesting the way that the trajectories of our lives can change based on circumstance, based on the things happening around us. I mean, you know, it's. I think lots of us have similar radicalizing stories, right? And I think the issue of Palestine is a very radicalizing one for so many people. Obviously, you have a personal connection to it, but it has that impact on people's lives because of the heaviness of the injustice. And I have to say, you know, as a journalist who's been covering this issue for a very long time, I actually find it quite difficult sometimes to consume media about Palestine. Not media, not news media, but I'm always watching the news about it. And it's just so horrifying that sometimes I feel like I don't have the brain space to like even watch a documentary about Palestine or a movie about Palestine. And I have to say, The Teacher, your film it's like such a high quality movie, from the acting to the actual cinematography of it to the like the storyline is so good. It's a bit of a, I even have to say it's a bit of a thriller in a way, like a sort of edge of your seat kind of film, but also very beautiful and also very heart-wrenching. But all that's to say people should absolutely see it. But it was just, it's not a documentary, so it's actually a film with a plot, with the characters, and Palestine is the issue.
I'm looking for one of your students, Yaqub Haddad.
هلا شرفت مس United Nations. Welcome to our home.
How do you keep them on track in an environment like this?
Some of them stop seeing the point anymore.
جاي عشانك، ركز معها يمكن تفيدك.
You're not confined in that prison anymore, and I'm here for you. You have to finish school. Yaqub, please, man.
يا أولاد الداش.
قاعدين يحرقوا كرم الزيتون.
How's Adam doing?
Lost.
I will work on this case, but it is not often that the state will bring criminal charges.
خلي عندك شوية أمل وتمسك فيه.
So that bad كل اللي مرقت فيه. فكر إنه ممكن يكون في عدل.
احنا كثير مضغوطين ولا ما كنا جبنا لهم.
ابنهم لثاني الكوهين الذي يبلغ من العمر 24 سنة كان قد اختطف منذ.
انت عارف الجواسيس في كل محل، عصافير بتغرد ليل نهار.
هذا جندي المخطوف صح؟
ممنوع تجيب السيرة لولا حدا، فاهم؟
مفهوم، أنا معك.
حياة آلاف الأسرى معلقة بهذا الجندي من ساعة ما جابوه لهون.
We will use every means possible to find him.
كان أعرف رح يطلع منها وكلهم كانوا عارفين رح يطلع منها. والله أنت قتلت يا أخوي.
الانتقام إحساس بشع بوكلك وبدمرك من جوا وما بحل ولا شيء. There are things that I'll never be able to share with you. I'm chained to my past.
أعطيني الفرد آدم.
آدم!
Mobilize a team for Burin. Smoke them up.
They'll keep him alive as long as it takes.
How do you know that?
Because they know that your people believe your son is worth thousands of mine.
So I guess all that's to say, if anyone's feeling the way I am, still see this movie, because it's like, it's a really, really great movie. But I want to talk to you a bit about it, because I guess all that's to say, it's hard to find a way to still make films about this issue, because there are so many angles you can come from. It's such a horrifying issue, but you also want to add so many layers to it. So I guess tell us, why did you make The Teacher? Like, what drew you to this particular story when there are so many different ways you can approach making a film about Palestine?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people wondered, you know, after all the success of the present, why I could have made a film about anything and the industry would have welcomed me. And, you know, how is it you chose this as your first feature film, and you didn't need to, and you could have made, the thing is, I'm only interested in making films really that matter to me in a deep and meaningful way. You know, that resonate with me on a personal level. And I honestly think the best films that get made are the ones that the filmmaker has connected to in such a way. And in this case, the source material is what I've written, right? And I think at the end of the day, yes, it speaks to me by way of my identity as a Palestinian, but more so as a human being. It matters to me that I am telling a story that is lending my artistic expression to those who have been silenced and marginalized and so forth. And then on the other hand, there's this idea of, well, I make the films not just to express myself, but to cope with all the injustice that we are witnessing, whether it be in this last year and a half of genocide or the last decades. I mean, it's appalling, and so there has to be some kind of channel or process to cope with it all, to be honest. And so for me, that's what making this film has been. And I'm so grateful that it arrived now, actually, at a time when I think I would be just tearing my hair out and going insane. So I have something to offer that's in active solidarity with our brothers and sisters on the ground in Palestine, experiencing unimaginable loss and suffering. And so I made it in the end for sort of personal, selfish reasons, but also because I want to tell stories that matter and lend that artistic expression. And for me, all my travels to Palestine, I've met with dozens and dozens of Palestinians who experience firsthand much of the absurd, cruel things that take place in the screenplay that I wrote. Palestinian children being processed through military detention, home demolitions, illegal Israeli settler violence, vandalism. And yet, you described it. There's a sort of a numbness or an indifference, or because, it is what it is. And the power of cinema is to bring it all closer in a way that, yes, does reverse this severe dehumanization that has been carried out for decades, that has culminated with such violence, this scale of violence in Gaza as the example, and what's happening in the West Bank, that for me, I felt I had to tell this story. Like, there's just no, this story that I've come up with, but it was a calling in so many ways that just happens to have arrived in this very crucial juncture. I wrote it more than 4 years ago.
Wow.
So it just happens. And, with the storyline, that's just coincidence in that sense. But everything in this film has been happening for decades. So this is the crazy part, to be honest, in all of this.
So I guess, is that what you mean? Because you talk about the film being inspired by true events. Is that what you mean when you say true events? I don't know. Was there actually some teacher that this kind of happened to, or do you mean all of the sort of details of just life in the West Bank and what that looks like?
So there's that element, which is, yes, life in the West Bank and all the people that have experienced firsthand all that injustice that is in the film. And it only touches the top of the iceberg, to be honest. There's so much more, despite the film feeling like there's so much in it. There is so much more, as you know. No, there's no specific teacher. So Bassem El-Saleh is my creation. I love Bassem. And although I had Saleh Bekli as my muse, in writing the character, as it were, in some ways. But it's also inspired by the story of an Israeli occupation soldier who, and I remember this being in the news, actually, in the British media at the time. In 2006, he was abducted, captured, and in 2011, he was released for over 1,000 Palestinian political prisoners, hundreds of whom were women and children, hundreds of whom were being held in administrative detention, which means without trial or charges, And I was blown away. This idea of 1,000 to 1, I think, again, coming back to this idea of dehumanization, the idea that Palestinians know that Israelis value their life as if it was, well, it used to be 1,000 to 1. Now, one of them for 1,000 Palestinians. Actually, again, you look at Gaza and the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who have been killed, maimed, injured, burned, millions displaced, and you realize there is no value for Palestinian life when it comes to, how we are perceived by our oppressor. And so, really, that really hit home for me, is that's a big root of the problem, is how you are perceived, by your occupier, your colonizer. So yeah, that was also part of it, but it was inspired by it. I wasn't going into the details of that story, although I did research a lot of it. But it was just inspired by, and then just creating my own fictional world, because there's a vivid visual verbal imagination that I get to apply as a fiction narrative filmmaker, whose source kind of material and inspiration is that reality. It's very much laced and rooted in the truth and reality.
So when I was watching this movie, I found myself wondering how you were able to film it. The West Bank, I think, is often overshadowed, especially over the last year and a half, by these just horrors unfolding in Gaza on our screens every day. But like you've mentioned, the violence in the West Bank, it's constant and it's deeply normalized. So I guess when it comes to making a film with this as your backdrop, was it difficult to make this film in a place like the West Bank, given those conditions of occupations? And I'm just curious, what are the sort of obstacles you faced in creating this film, especially during production?
I think we could do a proper podcast, just an entire,
right.
2 hours on that. So I'll just touch on a few things. So, you are shooting in militarily occupied, colonized territory, as it were, a place of apartheid, and there's no way around that. And I knew that, and we were going into that. And independent cinema is already extremely difficult. So, this was not the path of least resistance. And I know we could have shot elsewhere. We would have lost a lot, to be honest, authentically, the topography, working with Palestinians on the ground. But there is a version of this film that could have been made elsewhere. And I know that, and I realize that. But being on the ground added, in some ways, a sort of freedom that, as ironic as that word is, or how strange that word is, a freedom on the one hand to really be able to let the film breathe, to be able to offer that landscape and the wideness of the lenses, and to really show you Palestine with all its ugliness, but all its beauty as well in some ways, and to really work with everyone on the ground. But of course, that comes with headaches. Now we know, checkpoints and roadblocks, and that's part of these control systems. And yes, we experienced things like that. I remember one of the weekends, everybody left for their weekend. They were supposed to come back 2 days later. The Israelis set up roadblocks around Nablus, and 4 days later, no one could come back. And of course, from a production point of view, that's just money flying in the air, and huge problems when it comes to actors coming from abroad and so forth, But these are sort of more practical, logistical problems, right? And you deal with them. You just constantly deal with them, lost locations and all of this. What I had underestimated, or I realize now, I guess wasn't prepared for in some ways, despite not only knowing, but having written it in my screenplay, was the pressure, that the mental, emotional toll and pressure of trying to do justice to the injustice that is unfolding around you in real time, but getting word of that injustice, or even witnessing as you're trying to carry out your work and stay positive and get to the finish line and keep everyone safe. So an example is, on my way to work early one morning from my accommodation to my set, which was only a 5-6 minute drive, I passed by a couple with their 6 young children standing on the side of the road in front of the rubble of their freshly demolished home. Now, that's something that's in the film, of course, and I know it happens in Palestine, but to sort of meet that on my way to set. And, I got out the car, I chatted with them, and then I ended up actually hugging the mother for 3 minutes, both of us crying. We don't know each other. And then I'm like, okay, I got to go. But it really messes with your mind. So it's one thing when you're witnessing this, even on social media, it's a moral trauma. So what about when you're there and then you're, trying to present it? So another occasion we were shooting, we got word that in the village of Berean, where the teacher is from, illegal Israeli settlers had descended yet again and started to torch the olive groves. Now, again, it's something that happens not just in the village of Berean, it happens in many villages in Palestine. We were not shooting in the village of Berean, we were shooting near the village of Berean because we knew that it'd be too risky to shoot in Berean itself with that real aggression from the settlers. But we could see the smoke, and here we are also. We have a scene in the film where the settlers are burning the olive groves. It really hits home, that reality. And there are moments where even the sort of cast and crew from abroad would, sort of say, okay, is it safe? Is it, there was many headaches. There was even elements that just speaks to the psychology of the reality. So for example, we had, gone through the entire effort and the cost of bringing some burnt olive trees. They'd already been burnt by settlers, so we obviously did not burn olive trees. So we bought these trees and we dug them in this plot of land for the scene. And I'd already sort of asked, like, are we sure we know whose land this is? Have they given us approval, et cetera, et cetera? And I'd scouted locations to get this. The day before we are going to shoot that scene, again, headaches, but my team, they come up to me and they're like, okay, Farah, we have some bad news. I'm like, what happened? So, well, it turns out that plot of land wasn't who we thought it belonged to. It was the land next door. And so the actual owner of this land saw these burnt trees on his land, went into a full-on panic, thought his trees were being targeted, got in his truck, mowed down the burnt trees, then cut all of this beautiful sort of golden grass, as it were, that I had chosen the location for all the running scenes and everything, cut all of that away so that it would be soil, so that if the settlers were to return, things wouldn't catch fire as quickly or as easily. Had a complete meltdown, which of course horrified me because now we've traumatized this farmer. Afterwards, when we sort of explained to him that it was for the film, he was so sweet and so apologetic. But just to show you that he went into a panic. This isn't normal farming, that he has to believe that his trees are being targeted and burned by nearby settlers. So, there's a headache that we got, not directly from, the reality in terms of direct military occupation, but an indirect kind of result, as it were. So yeah, I could go on and on and on, to be honest.
Wow, I can't even imagine. So I want to ask you a few questions about casting. The people you casted for this, the acting was phenomenal. You had a lot of Palestinians. I'm curious, were these people who live in the West Bank? Are they from outside? And I also imagine in an acting and film industry that being a Palestinian stuck in an area under occupation, you are a bit limited in what you can even act in. So I'm curious if you can speak to that. And then also, you did have Israelis or people playing Israelis in this, and they had Israeli accents. I don't know if they were actually Israeli, but was that difficult to cast as well, given the subject matter? It obviously has a very specific political viewpoint that I imagine a lot of Israelis would not like.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, Saleh Bakri, who is the teacher, who's this brilliant, very seasoned actor, he is a Palestinian. He lives in Haifa. He is somebody who, out of principle, will not work on films with, in Israel that involve Israeli funding or, that go against his beliefs and politically it's like, well, if you don't believe in my right to exist and my people to, then I'm not going to work with you. So he's made this decision. And of course that means it's so much harder for him to get work where he lives. That said, he is free to work wherever or with whom he wants to. And he's somebody that I worked with on The Present. So I've worked with him before. And it was just a no-brainer for me to cast him as the teacher. He's the first person I told about the film. So, and he's, of course, at his heart and soul, he understands the lived Palestinian experience, not just as somebody from 48 Palestine, but as somebody who has spent a lot of time in the West Bank. He was also teaching at one point students in acting in Ramallah. He spent a lot of time there. He really gets it. on a deep, level in his heart. And so that was that. In terms of other actors, of course, in the West Bank, there's only so much sort of business available, as it were. But the casting can happen; it does happen. When it comes to the actors acting Israeli characters, there's only one Israeli Jewish person in the film, and that's Einat Weissman, and she's a beautiful, wonderful woman, actress who, has suffered because of her beliefs that Palestinians should be free and they should not be occupying, and they should, so her politics are aligned with my politics, that I have absolutely no problem casting her. But I'm not interested in casting any Israelis who are Jewish, not because they're Jewish, but if they do not believe in our freedom and existence, then these aren't people I want to work with. And so I don't. But then you've got so many Palestinians who speak Hebrew well, or you've got to bear in mind as well, they are on the receiving end of a soldier's oppression or that experience, so they can bring that to the role, to the character firsthand in so many ways. So everybody in the film who's Arabic or speaking Hebrew is from Palestine, except you have Paul Hertzberg, who acts as the the head of the director Lieberman, and he is a wonderful actor. He's British from South Africa, so he's British South African, but and he is Jewish, and he loved the screenplay, and again, he believes Palestinians should be free, and so he's somebody who came over for that, and then the international actors are Imogen Poots, Andrea Irvine, Stanley Townsend, all love the screenplay, and British, Irish, and so everybody is free to work on what they want. The question becomes, do they? And also, what might be the repercussions for someone like Saleh Bekri? But he's been living with that for a long time, and yeah.
Well, so I want to, a bunch of spoiler alerts for anybody who doesn't want spoiler alerts. This is where you stop. But I want to ask you a bit about the plot and various characters. So I mean, there was like so much of this that I made little notes about, because I was like, oh, I want to ask her about that. But I also wanted to ask, because I know this film, you said you had it at a festival in September 2023, right? So this entire film is unfolding as people are watching it after that, under this looming genocide in Gaza. And I noticed at the end of the film, you have this part where one of the main characters is watching the news, and you hear this many people have been killed in Gaza. It's obviously post October 7th. And I guess, you added that? You must have obviously added that after. So
no,
you didn't.
No, I didn't. No. If you listen carefully, the news mentions Operation Protective Edge. And so, of course, in the summer of 2014, when Israel was, pummeling Gaza in that summer, where over 2,500 Palestinians, including 500 children, were killed. And at the time, of course, that was the horror of all horrors. No one could have expected, of course.
Isn't that crazy that I'm sitting here being like, oh, okay, she does. How did she get Gaza in there? And it's just a past horrific war on Gaza.
Absolutely.
It shows you the consistency of it. My goodness.
Absolutely. Wow. And that's what's so disturbing, and that those numbers now are so pathetic and overshadowed by genocide. I mean, tens upon tens of thousands of lives obliterated.
It's insane.
Crazy.
It's insane. Well, so this is going to be a spoiler alert, but I mean, it's also kind of in the film trailer. But one of the characters that you very quickly learn to like is this character Yaqub, who ends up being killed early on in the film in a violent settler attack. And I just found this scene was powerful in so many ways. It just kind of represents in many ways the Palestinian experience, where this kid is just trying to defend his olive trees with literally nothing but his fists, and this settler very casually just shoots and kills him. And then it's just kind of, it just makes you think of all the times you see the news and it's, a Palestinian was killed attacking a settler or something. And it's like, oh, is that how it usually actually plays out? But in moments like that and scenes like that, I mean, I can sit here and project onto you what your intention is with that. But was that your intention? It really is. And even if you kind of zoom out, it's like that one act of violence where this kid is like pissed off seeing his olive trees be burnt, and he goes up and just punches a settler who's got like an AK, and one of them's got an AK-47 and just kills him like it's nothing. Walks away. Later on, totally gets away with it, obviously, because there's never any justice for this stuff, and everyone is just completely like they can't do anything about it. And it's like Palestinians have fists or rocks, and then the Israelis have like nuclear weapons. And anyways, I'm just curious your thoughts on that scene and kind of like zooming out on the entire colonial project.
I think it's more, you have to look at just the intention of the entire film. My intention with this film is really to take audiences on this emotional journey into the lives and experiences of these characters. And I want to leave you contemplating the choices and the decisions the characters make in this very cruel reality in which they're forced to make them. And so with the case of Yaqub as an example, ask yourself, all right, if your land is being destroyed, your livelihood, I mean, this is economic terrorism, it's environmental terrorism, it's your family's livelihood, it's your land, what do? How would you deal with it? And so for me, I mean, we've seen this story has repeated over and over again. Palestinians defending their lands, defending their livelihoods, defending their families, defending their homes, whether it's, firebombs being thrown into a Palestinian home where the families are burnt alive, which has happened, as we know, or Palestinians running down to their olive groves to stop them being cut down by the military and then getting shot, or by settlers burning them down and then being injured or shot, or these pogroms going on where they're burning the cars and they're bashing up shops. And this is all happening. And the question becomes, well, what do you do? What is the reaction to that? So I guess I would say the film shows this idea of the pursuit of justice. And to an extent, you've mentioned what happens with the settler in the courts. The futility of that pursuit, where those you turn to for justice are one and the same as those complicit in the crime itself, right? Well, what do you do then? And then on top of that, I would say the film examines the inevitability of resistance when no other path to freedom, to justice exists or remains. So that scene you've mentioned is just one moment of that injustice culminating in the crime of all crimes, which is death. He's killed, he's murdered. And then the pursuit of justice that, and is it a cause for revenge? Is it a cause for resistance? What do you think of that resistance then? What would you do if it was you? And that's what I want. I want audiences to ask themselves when they watch this entire film, to say, if this is the lived Palestinian experience, would you accept this for yourself? And if the answer is no, why should Palestinians be expected to? And what kind of resistance or what kind of reaction would you have had?
There's this other scene. I mean, there's so many scenes, but just a few that stuck out to me that I just like really wanted to raise with you. You do this beautiful thing, this very smart thing throughout the film where the Bassem, the teacher, the story of how he got to where he is sort of like you get little bits and pieces of it throughout the film, like what happened to his family, what happened to his kid, what happened to his wife. And it shows you the way that these different dimensions of violence, of colonialism impact these interpersonal relationships. And in the case of getting his kid died in detention, his wife left him. And there's a scene where he's like arguing with his wife, I think after their kid got taken or got sentenced to like 8 years in prison, which is so normal for people in the occupied West Bank. He's like a teenager, this kid. And he says to her, she's blaming him for bringing his son to a protest, and that's why he got detained. And he says to her, what should I do? Like, forbid him and teach him to submit? And that line I thought was incredibly moving, because that is what Palestinians under occupation, under colonialism, have to contend with. It's either like submission or little acts of resistance that can actually get you killed. And then the level of trauma and blame that probably gets dished out among families who disagree how you should deal with that. I'm just curious, can you talk about not just that scene, but just that sort of interpersonal reality of the damage that colonialism does to families, to relationships? And I mean, I thought you did such a brilliant job of putting that in a cinematic setting.
It's interesting you bring that scene up. For me, I think that's one of the most one of my most favorite scenes, if you get my meaning. Like it just gets me every time, and I wrote it. Like I think in many ways maybe that's an expression of what's in my heart, is like, what do you expect? What do you expect to encourage your children to just bow down onto their knees and accept this oppression and act like everything's normal, like this is all okay? It's not okay. And so I guess in some ways, say in Arabic, بفش القلب, it expresses what's in my heart, and it allows others to feel what's in their hearts is being expressed. And so maybe that's why it stuck with you.
Well done.
Resonated with you as well. And it resonated with the actor, Saleh Bakri, and it resonated with the character, Bassem al-Saleh, who says it. It's again, it's one of those questions posed not just in the scene, but to an audience and to the viewer, because I very, very much believe that, and it's at the top of my website for my production company. David Dormino, he said, true art always had a role and responsibility to take a stand, because the fundamental role of the artist is to help people shape their point of view in a way that liberates us. And for me, in many ways, a scene like that has a sense of liberation, as frustrated and as painful as that is. The liberation of being able to express it and to have it up there on the screen, where how do I say, it kind of empowers the oppressed in many ways to sort of see that up on the screen and hear it and feel it. Now, to your point of what that a life lived like that means. Now, look, I'm not a psychologist, or some kind of analyst on these things, but it's very clear at the end of the day, there is so many dimensions to the trauma of being a community and a nation under occupation and colonization. And then you get into the micro and you're looking at the village, and then you look at the individual household, and then you look at the individual. And on every level and layer, there is trauma, there is pain, there is suffering, there is, how does, and this speaks very much to my previous film, The Present, as well, this idea of the checkpoints, this constant indignity, the oppression, this, humiliation, this life lived constantly trying to keep your head above the rising tide of degradation. These are lines from my first film. This degradation. How do you go home and smile at your children and play with them after going through checkpoints? How do you teach your children, dignity when they've watched you, being oppressed like this? How do you convince them to study when their house has been demolished, and that how do you function in any normal way? Now, we look at Palestinians and we think, wow, because they still manage to function. They live in conditions, and this isn't even touching on Gaza, not even touching on what's happening in Gaza. It's like perseverance and pushing through and that resilience and that steadfastness. But the fact is, the trauma and the problems that have been created over the decades and as we speak, are just multi-layered and are so, I think, beyond what any of us can fathom, let alone live through and experience ourselves. And so it's got to be doing something on that level to Palestinians. And look, I've met with so many Palestinians that clearly are suffering deep depression, despite having to get on with life. It's beyond, to be honest.
Well, I'm so happy that you're able to put it in the form you did, because it is so powerful and it does resonate so much. And I just have a couple more things I want to ask you about here. And one of them is, we saw what happened with a movie like No Other Land being blocked from different festivals. And I guess, I'd want to ask you, do you anticipate maybe similar trouble with distribution for the teacher, or maybe not? But that's kind of a segue also into the fact that Watermelon Pictures exists now. And that's new. And they've become a distributor of your film. And so has their presence perhaps changed the game for films like yours?
Yeah, I would say so. Yes, in a beautiful way. So look, the film was very well received by audiences and by festivals overall. We've won over 18 international awards, mostly audience awards, best actor awards. We have MENA distribution, so we've even released across cinemas in the Middle East and North Africa, and now video on demand. We released in cinemas in the UK and Ireland. That was a self-release, which is, on the one hand, I'm very happy actually we did that, but it was very disappointing as a British Palestinian film that has won all these awards, ticks all the boxes, and they always say it should be relevant to the time. Well, I can't think of a film more relevant to the time actually right now, and so forth. But we did not get distribution in the UK and Ireland, but we self-released, and it was to a wonderful reception and reactions, and we've just got to keep pushing forward. I think that, but then there's a lot of major markets that we don't have distribution for. Even though we have what is considered one of the top sales agents for the film. So on the one hand, it's disappointing. On the other hand, actually, we've done very well for independent cinema, regardless of it being Palestinian. And on top of that, being a film that is, Palestinian. Watermelon Pictures in the US, we would not be distributing right now. We didn't have a distributor up until this point. I think that they are filling a very, very important gap in the market. I'm sad to say, for independent cinema anyway, a lot of independent films, regardless of them being to do with Palestine or not, there seems to be a gap in the market. Some get distribution, but many, many do not. And then on top of that, well, we've seen a lot of the censorship, a lot of also the reluctance of distributors and mainstream media to support films like this. I think that they're filling a gap that is much needed, and I love that they've arrived, and I'm really, really pleased that we're pushing forward. And one of the most important things when you have a film, again, regardless whether it's Palestine related or not, is that a distributor feels passionately about your work and the story you're trying to tell. And that, I can tell you, Watermelon Pictures really does. They are passionate about the films and the filmmakers, and they want these stories to get out there. So yeah, really happy about that.
Well, I am so excited for this to come out. It releases, I believe, in New York on April 11th. And we'll include a link in the description for where people can go to get tickets and to keep up where it's showing. Farah, I want to thank you so much for the work that you've done. It's truly incredible. And I guess, any last words for just what you hope people take away from the film, The Teacher?
I think I've said it all. I think I would always leave it with, is this a life that you would accept for yourself? And if it's not, then don't expect Palestinians to, and get up off your asses and help end this oppression, really. I hope it activates, I hope it inspires, and please share it. You see the film, if it resonates, share it with friends, communities, co-workers. That's it, really.
Well, Farah, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.